a cycling coach. Okay, I'm coming up right on 7 o'clock. I'm going to dive into just a quick little about me. If a few more people join in a minute or two late, that's okay too. So that's me. That's me doing a cross race. Special shout out to Hinkle, who probably heard me on my last webinar say I don't really have a lot of photos of myself riding or racing or coaching. So Hinkle sent me a couple, and so that's me rolling through a sandpit at the Hardwood Cross Race this past fall. I did just want to kind of highlight a little bit about myself. AWI Coaching, or Andrew Watson Coaching, is my business. I'm a full-time cycling coach, specialize in a lot of off-road cyclists, mountain bike, gravel, cyclocross, a couple of road athletes here and there. And I always like to kind of highlight a bit of a service of what I do. Every coach is different. Some coaches specialize in doing a lot of projects and working with a lot of, the Ontario Cycling Association or Cycling Canada. Some coaches just train athletes. I try to put a few of those things into play. I like to do a few different things, but one of the things I do is I just have an hourly service where athletes or clubs can hire me for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours a day. And I also do some long-term contracts with clubs, and I have done those in the past. Energy Cycling Club, Angry Johnny Cycling Club. So if you are a cycling club or work for a cycling club and want to reach out and see if I can help your club, and that can be athlete development, that can just be ride leader development as well. If you want to train some of your coaches, give some of your coaches or ride leaders a little bit more, practical learning beyond NCCP, I can usually help with that, and some of my coordinates there. Okay, so I already got the first question. I have zero idea how to interpret heart rate data. Okay, Andrew, we'll get to that. Some of this will play into, I'll use power as a lot of an example, but a lot of these can be derived from heart rate as well. So hopefully it gives you a few ideas, Andrew. And as you might have seen, if you have any questions as we go, type those into the comment box on Facebook, and I'll answer those to the best of my ability as we roll along. There is a little bit of a delay, so please ask your question as soon as it kind of pops to mind, or when you have time, and I'll be sure to get to that, especially when we get towards the end of the presentation. So as I said, we're going to talk about daily training metrics, and you'll see these. Some of them you'll see on some paid services. Some you can see for free, depending on the program software that you have. So a few things to check out is Training Peaks, which has a free and a paid subscription. Golden Cheetah, which is a desktop platform, absolutely free and has a lot on it. Strava, we all know Strava has some free and paid services. Garmin Connect, Exert, WKO5. A few things to check out if you are looking to get a little bit more into metrics. Where can you find some of these metrics? And also our devices have a lot of these metrics built into them, like our Garmin's or our Wahoos. So we can see a lot of these metrics live, like TSS, normalized power, those metrics. So we can see those as we're working out. So I do want to kind of dive right in. This is building on the last complete webinar I did was more of a global metrics and how we interpret long-term training data. So tonight we're diving into the daily metrics and what some of those mean. And it's actually really important to understand normalized power. And that's what I've highlighted there as NP. That stands for normalized power. A lot of the daily metrics and the long-term chronic metrics are based off of normalized power, not average power. And that's important to know. So average power is basically just add up every power for every second throughout a ride, divide by the amount of seconds, and that's going to be your average. Normalized power, it actually exponentially weights the 30-second average power. And what that does is, as soon as if you surge on the bike, and this is a power metric, not a heart rate metric. As soon as you surge on a bike for 30 seconds or more, what this does is it gives you a little extra credit, so to speak, for that. So it bumps up your average. It's also a good way to measure how punchy a ride is. So if you have a really high normalized power and a really low average power, you know that the ride was very surgy, a lot of coasting, a lot of punching up climbs. So you can evaluate, and there's another little metric to do that with a snapshot. And it's actually more of a measure of stress of a ride, not just average power. And sometimes even the people that have worked on this and developed it, sometimes they don't even like to put wattage beside it, because it gets confused with average power a lot. And it's only relevant at about 20 minutes plus. So if you're looking at normalized power in an interval, let's say a 4 or 5 minute interval, it's irrelevant. It's a long term. It's a longer term power metric, 20 minutes plus. Anything shorter than that, you're not using it as the way it was intended. And this is available as a data field. So if you have a power meter and you have a Garmin or a Wahoo, normalized power you can see live. And a lot of people do train by normalized power, and that's absolutely fine versus average. But it is available for you to see live while you're riding or training. And I believe you can see it in Strava. It's called weighted average power. I believe it's called normalized power on Zwift. So different companies, different platforms might have a slightly different way of what they call it, depending on how they've licensed the information from Training Peaks, who is the one that developed this. So sometimes it's called a little bit different, depending on what platform you're on. So I'm going to move on. So that's important because that's what everything else is based off of, normalized power. So I'm going to move to TSS and Training Stress Score. And if you tuned in for the last webinar where I went into the longer term training metrics, TSS is what all of those long term charts, the Performance Manager chart, your CTL, ATL, TSB, chronic training load, all those things are based off of Training Stress Score, or TSS, another metric developed by Training Peaks. So if you see TSS, they've that platform, if it's Zwift or Strava or Sufferfest, whoever, they've actually licensed that from them. If they haven't, they're probably using something a little bit different. I think Suffer Score, I've seen that. Sometimes they call it a little bit different, but it basically combines the intensity of the ride and the duration of the ride. And 1 hour at normalized power at FTP is equal to 100 TSS is a simple way to look at that. So if your functional threshold power, I should say what that is too. So basically the power that you could push for an hour, theoretically, let's say it's 200, and you ride a normalized power of 200 for an hour, you'll get 100 TSS. Now, if you ride for 2.5 hours at about half of your FTP, or a little bit more than half, you'll also get about 100 TSS. So it combines the intensity and the duration into one score. And that's a way that we can just kind of start to equalize some of the stress that we go under in training, whether it's in the day, like that we're looking at, or longer term. So you can add TSS up by day, by week, by month, by training block, what have you. And again, this is also available as a real-time data field in your training device. So if you use a Garmin or Wahoo, it'll have a setting in there to set your FTP. Make sure that that is set correctly, and there's ways to test that. And then you'll get a pretty good accurate on-the-fly TSS. Some athletes and some coaches prescribe training by TSS. So they don't prescribe it by time, by distance, by speed, by heart rate, by wattage. They'll just say, I want you to go out and do 200 TSS today at endurance. And the athlete will go and do 200 TSS at endurance. They'll have some guidelines there, but that's just another way that we can quantify work done. So again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to throw those into the comment. Going back to Andrew's question about heart rate data versus power data, TSS, you can get that based on heart rate as well. If it would just be based on your heart rate threshold and your average heart rate for the workout, you can also get TSS, but not normalized power. That is a power metric. Okay, so I'm going to move on. So kind of expanding on this TSS idea, here's two different workouts, same athlete, and you can see that their training stress score is about the same, 95, 92, so just under about 100. And the workout on the left is 2 hours and 36 minutes. Normalized power 166. So you can tell this was a pretty steady ride for most people. I can tell you that this person's threshold is probably close to 280s, 290s, something like that. And then on the right, they do an hour and 10 minutes and they get 92 at TSS. So you can get just a quick glimpse of the equivalent stress between the two workouts is similar. It's not the same, but the stress is similar. The strain is different, and I'll maybe get to strain in a different webinar. But again, that's what TSS means, and that's why if you go out for a really short, hard ride with your buddies, you can get a lot of TSS. And if you go out for a really long cruise on the bike paths, maybe you can get the same TSS. That's why, because it's based on intensity, not just duration. So hopefully that makes sense. And we're going to get to all the other numbers in the next few slides. So IF, this is an Andrew Watson fave, and it stands for intensity factor. And it divides your normalized power by your FTP. And there's a quick example of that. If your normalized power for a workout or a ride or an interval, and I'll leave it, let's just say for a duration of time longer than 20 minutes is 225, and your FTP is 280, then the IF for that workout or that interval is 0.8. So a good little snapshot. And I love looking at this because I can just go on Training Peaks or WKO. I can pull up this report and I can just see if the athlete did what I told them to do. Did I want them to do a really chill and active recovery ride? I don't even really look at the duration, because if they do a 45-minute active recovery ride or a 60-minute, I don't really care. But I want to make sure that they did it at the right intensity level. So I want to make sure that it's below 0.6, just as a quick gauge. And I put some of those examples there. Because it takes out duration. It's only how hard the workout is. So usually in this 0.6, it would be an endurance. 0.8 would be about tempo. And if you're getting close to 1.0, you know that it was a very intense workout or possibly a race. You'll notice a lot of Zwift races are usually up towards 1.0 on that. It is possible to go over 1.0, but if you go over that a lot, maybe your FTP might be set a little bit low. So again, a great metric. I love looking at that. You can just get a good snapshot of either an entire workout or just a selection of a workout, just to see how hard you went, or if you're a coach, how hard the athlete you're working with went, and just a good snapshot without doing a bunch of manual math in your head. So hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions, be sure to throw those into the comment box. Andrew, I believe that IF does apply to heart rate as well, and pace and a few different things. So you'd have the same type of metric. So this is kind of how I do it. This is how I would evaluate a workout. So you can see that this athlete, you can see some structure here, which is good. So when I'm looking at a workout, I can see structure. I know the athlete did pretty much what I asked them to do. The shaded blocks are actually the prescription. So you can tell the athlete might have done a little bit longer warm-up between a warm-up block in the actual main set, that's okay. It's okay if it doesn't match up perfectly. And for the entire workout, and this is why I was talking about entire workout versus selection. And what I do is, I don't know exactly what this workout was. I believe it was probably maybe even threshold intervals. I'll actually drag and create a selection for that main set, including the warm-up. So hopefully you can see that. I'll go back one slide. And then I drag, and this is in Training Peaks. So if you have Training Peaks Premium, I know that you can do this. You can do this in a lot of different platforms, Strava, WKO, Golden Cheetah. So you can get this depending on what platform you're using. I'll actually highlight that and create a selection for it for the main workout. And then I'll look at that. So you can see circled selection. So now I'm just looking at that information, and IF 0.96. So I know the athlete went hard. I know that this was a challenging workout for the athlete. And IF of 0.96 for 15 minutes. So that's kind of how I would look at that. And 77 TSS for 50 minutes. So I know that it was a very intense workout. They probably hit a lot of marks. And then I would probably continue on with my analysis. So I have a quick question from an Adam. If you could only use one metric, what would it be? That's a good question. Sorry if the dead air. I would use, if I could only use one of these metrics, like time. Like if I had to, I would include, I want to know how long an athlete is riding. If time's too easy, the next metric I would use, and actually, Adam, I'd throw it back to you and say it depends on the workout. So if I want to evaluate an athlete's endurance ride, I'll look at VI and variability index. And I know we'll get to that. If it's an intensity workout, then I'll probably lean more towards normalized power or IF. Why include the warm-up? Because warm-ups are hard, and warm-ups should be hard. They should get all your systems running in your body, so it does count as intensity, and that's why I would include that in this selection. Let's say you don't have to do that. I might even and actually, in all honesty, I would probably do another step here, where I would just highlight the intervals without the warm-up and look at that. But I like to include the warm-up main set and I always look at that. I always look at the intensity factor for that and a few different metrics. Oh, got some good questions coming in. What would happen if you have too many high IF rides in a week? Okay. Is weekly TSS like a budget where you can have a bunch of short high IF rides or a few long high TSS rides with lower IF? That's a really good question, Hinkle. And basically it comes down to what is the goal of the training? And be really careful here. And I know I have to do it as a coach and an athlete, is what are you trying to do? And you should never chase TSS for the sake of chasing TSS or IF. But generally what would happen is if you're getting most of your TSS from high intensity, from high IF workouts. So let's say you're just jumping in a Zwift race every other day, or just doing really hard intervals every other day. You're going to be one type of athlete. You're probably going to be pretty fit. You probably have some speed. But if that's all you do, that's a lot of intensity. And I think you might erode some base, you might erode some long-term fitness. So it's actually a good gauge, Hinkle. I've used that when I do reviews and consultations with athletes, where I basically put all of their IFs or their average IF for a week into a report, and I look at that just to make sure they aren't doing too many high IF rides. So TSS, it kind of is like a budget, and that's a really good way to put it. If you know that you can handle 500 TSS a week, how do you get that 500 TSS, or you aim for that? So that is a good way to look at it. But I would say that high IF rides versus low IF rides are just physiologically two different things. And depending on the time of year. So in the winter or late fall, winter, generally with a peak of a race in July or maybe even June, right now most of your rides should be on the lower IF scale and basically trying to accumulate as much TSS as possible for your schedule and your life schedule. That's the goal right now. And don't chase TSS with just high IF rides. So hopefully that kind of answered it, but it is a really good question, Hinkle. But this is how we can measure it, right? You can look at this and say, well, maybe I am doing too many high intensity rides by just using that one metric and taking a look at that and seeing how many high IF rides you do versus low IF rides that you do or an athlete does. So I'm going to move along. We still got some time. If you have any more questions, don't hesitate to type those in. Here's another one actually for Adam, and another AWI fave is work done. And that's in kilojoules. Andrew, if you're still on, this would just be a power metric. You're not going to get kilojoules with heart rate. You will with power because it actually measures the total energy expended. And I don't know the formula off the top of my head. Energy. You translate that into how many watt seconds you do, and then you can translate that into kilojoules of energy done. Long story short, it's a great way to look at how much energy was expended in a workout or a main set. Again, if we go back to that selection. Really handy for nutrition planning. You can actually, it's very close to calories burnt, but you can actually be sure of the calories burnt, not just based on a formula based on heart rate based on VO2 max or X, Y, and Z. You can actually say, okay, this is how much energy I put out. I need to replace that throughout the next 2 days. I need to replace that, try to replace that, maybe half of that while you're on the bike. It's a great way to nutrition plan. And it is available as a live metric on your training device. So Garmin, Wahoo, you can see how many kilojoules you do. Just like TSS, some coaches, some athletes, depending on the time of year, depending on the training goals, might prescribe workouts by kilojoules. They might say for a professional, hey, go out and do 3,000 kilojoules in your endurance ride this weekend. And because that can cut out through some of the coasting. I'll show you another example of that coming up. But it kind of cuts through. It's a great way to quantify rides and workouts and versus inside versus outdoors. And I have an example of that coming up. So hopefully I haven't lost anyone yet. If you do need a recap of anything, we'll slide back. But again, work kilojoules, that's directly from the power meter itself and how much power you are putting out over time. And so you can see that this athlete, tempo ride, IF 0.8. So pretty hard ride, not too hard. Hour 35, and they did about 1,000 kilojoules. I can also tell you that most Ontario Cups, if you're a rider between 65 and 75 kilos, you're probably looking at about an Ontario Cup XCO race, 90-minute race, you're usually looking at about 1,250 calories, something like that, as work done if an athlete has a power meter on. Okay, but I won't even get too much into that, but the VI will be a little bit higher in a mountain bike race. So this was the example that I was chatting about, and how I use work done to compare an athlete's rides. So this was a 4-hour trainer ride that this athlete did, and this example is the same athlete, and you can tell that the elapsed time was 4 hours. They pedaled for 4 hours and 5 minutes roughly, so there's a little bit of a break there, probably a little nature break. We'll get into VI. IF 0.69. So I know it's right around endurance. 200 TSS, solid. And they did 2,800 kilojoules. So remember when I said, a professional athlete might go out and do a 3,000 kilojoule ride. Okay, they've done that. And then that athlete's heading to a training camp and going for rides with other athletes, group rides, that kind of thing. I might still say, hey, I need you to do 3,000 kilojoules today because that's what you're doing, right? That's a good solid endurance ride. So we want to do some more of those. Yeah, then the athlete jumps in a group ride. So you can see elapsed time, 5.5 hours. Moving time, 5 hours. And I just got to move one thing quick on my screen so that I can see. Okay. And so moving time, 5 hours. We'll get to VI later. IF 0.67, so right around endurance. Again, that's great. 227 TSS. That's normal because it's a little bit longer ride. But again, they actually did less work. They went from 28 and change to 27 and change work done. Less work. TSS is higher, but that's a stress score, so keep that in mind. So none of these are they're not always equal to each other. This is just how I look at these things. And this is a great way, to chat with that athlete and say, okay, great. Keep this in mind when you go away to training camps or when you're on a group ride, is you might have to ride longer with that group, or you might have to ride with that group, then go out and do another hour by yourself to get the same amount of work done. If this athlete only did a 4-hour ride with a group, it would actually have done a lot less work. So I love kilojoules for measuring the quality of a workout. Hinkle's asking, Super Sapiens, do you think those Super Sapien glucose monitors will become a standard training metric like a power meter? How do you think they might change training? Great question, Hinkle. I have not used one myself. I think that there probably is value to it as long as they're accurate. I have seen maybe it's just some anecdotal things about maybe not being as accurate as we might think they are. But as a training tool, I think it's a handy calibration gauge. Just like a power meter is, just like a heart rate monitor is, I think a lot of the power from those devices is that you use them for a while, you get to know your body and how it reacts, like heart rate, like power dropping after a long endurance ride, and then you learn from it. It's an education tool to maybe better fuel yourself. Maybe you can pick up subtle cues that you're bonking before you actually do bonk. So I think they're handy, but at the same time, I'd say if you need that, you don't want to become reliant on it. You don't want to become reliant on a device telling you need to eat. And I get like this sometimes with some of the new like HRV and Whoop and things like that. Not that they're bad, but if you need a watch to tell you that you're tired, then I worry about that. You should be able to know if you're tired. You should be able to know if you're hungry, things like that. So I come with it not with skepticism, but with I'd be curious to try one myself. But will it become dominant in endurance sport? I'm not sure. I'm not sure it will. I think it's just another handy thing to take a look at. So keep moving on. So we are coming to the last few slides. If you have any more questions, don't hesitate to throw those into the chat box. This has been great. Just about half an hour, which is kind of what I aim for. So the next metric I'd go for, and Adam, this one kind of goes to your question about variability index and what I look for in an endurance ride. And this is one of them. I like outdoor endurance rides to be at around 1.1 or lower. And what this is a measure of is how close your normalized power is to your average power, or how steady your ride would be close to 1.0. a punchy ride is going to be higher. So a really punchy ride, punchy race, I've seen some Zwift races at like 1.4, 1.5. That's huge. That's a lot of like 30-second surges plus, and a lot of coasting as well. So on, off, on, off, on, off. We don't want that for endurance rides. We want to be kind of around that 1.0, 1.1. A trainer endurance ride, or an indoor ride is always going to be a little steadier than an outdoor ride. But that's another great metric that I look at for endurance rides. And like I said, it's another AWF fave. So EF, this is another fave actually. EF, I want to chat about it, but again, I don't look at it workout by workout. I look at it over time, but I did just want to throw it into today just so you know what it is. And that's efficiency factor. That's your watts divided by your heart rate. And I think of it as miles per gallon. And it's actually your normalized power divided by your average heart rate. So if you were to make this really, really simple, if you were to have a normalized power of 150 and an average power of 150, your EF would be 1.0. Okay. Then if your normalized power, again, super simple math, was 300 and your average heart rate was 150, you would have, it would be 2.0. It would be double. And that, so higher is better, but you want to see higher over time. With endurance training, you want to see that trending up. You want to see that you're putting out more power for less stress. So heart rate's a measurement of stress. You can look at this lap by lap if you wanted to see if your efficiency is going up or down, if you're doing long tempo blocks. Gives you a good idea of your physiological picture, like and state throughout a workout or through a ride. But I really do look at it over time. And it's great for steady rides. If you're doing a lot of intervals or racing, things like that, again, it's another good endurance metric, not so much an interval metric. So yeah, no, EF's a great one. Again, over time. VI is another great one for workouts. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of get into those. VAM, I'm not even going to get into VAM on this one per se, but that's vertical meters per hour, and that's how fast you're climbing, but I don't want to get into that one tonight. So yeah, this is another great metric. Again, this has to be a steady workout to use power to heart rate. If you're doing a bunch of intervals or a race or things like that, it's not going to be as helpful to you. And is a measure of cardiac drift or aerobic decoupling. And it actually takes EF, your efficiency factor from the first half of the selection or the workout, divides it by the second half of the selection or the workout. And if it's going up, if the percentage is higher than 0, that means that your power is either dropping throughout a ride or that your heart rate's climbing, or a little bit of a combination of both. And that's a good indicator of aerobic fitness. If an athlete can do an endurance ride for 3 or 4 hours with 0 aerobic decoupling, you know that they're pretty fit. So that's that measurement. You can also look at this for longer steady state intervals, 20-minute tempo sessions, sub-threshold. You can see how that athlete changes physiologically and if they're truly steady state intervals or workouts. That's another great one to keep an eye on. I will say that if you're training inside without a fan, you'll notice this metric goes up a lot more than outside, even if you're riding pretty steady. Is there a time? So another question, is there a time frame for EF that should be used? Again, I would use it if I was looking at it in workout terms. If I was using it to compare intervals, I would use it for longer steady state intervals, just like power to heart rate, at least 10-minute blocks. So if there was 10-minute blocks of tempo, I might look at the lap by lap to see if the efficiency is dropping or increasing. A good example of that is if an athlete does 4 by 10-minute tempo. The first interval might actually be the worst for aerobic efficiency, because they're not warmed up properly yet. But then the second one might actually be the best. Maybe they drop back down from there. But yeah, I would use it probably 10 minutes plus steady state kind of workouts. Okay, so another quick way, example again, how do I use Training Peaks? How would I use software to analyze a workout? And I chatted about looking at a whole workout versus a selection of a workout. So this is an example of that. So this is about an hour and a half workout total, but this athlete just was doing a endurance workout. Sorry, cancel that. This is a tempo workout. And I know that I can drag that selection. They were obviously using erg mode. I can just drag that main set, and it was about 52 minutes. IF just under 0.8, so I know it's tempo based on the intensity factor. VI is 1.0. That's to be expected with a steady state erg. Power to heart rate 1.8, so about 2% cardiac drift. Anything over 5 is significant. Okay, so if this athlete was at 5% for this, I wouldn't give them any longer tempo workouts to do. As an example, I would have them do this one again, or I would shorten it into blocks. But that's kind of how I use power to heart rate. Is under 5 is kind of what you want. Over 5 is significant. You always want some, but if it's always over 5, it's probably too much intensity, too long a workout. However you want to look at that. And so again, that's kind of just how I would look at how I'd use the whole selection. So this is the last slide. So if you have any last questions, be sure to type those into the comment box. So great example. This was probably 4.5 hour ride. And you can see, I cheated, drew some black marks on there. You can see where the athlete's heart rate trended a little bit up, but their power trended down. I smoothed it out a little bit, added those, but you can see that. You can see their power gradually dropped, and that showed up in the power to heart rate metric of about 15%. So does that mean this wasn't a good workout? Not necessarily. Do I want this athlete to go out there and do this several times a week for weeks on end? No, because I think that would be too much. There's too much signaling here that these rides are too long for this athlete. What I actually don't remember who this was. It could have been me. What was going on here with this athlete? Maybe it was just a one-off group ride with some friends. But I have a feeling that a 2.5 to 3 hour ride would be great for this athlete. They don't need to do 4.5 hours because there's too much stress towards the end of a ride. I want to get them to 5%, a little bit longer, and then they're home on the couch recovering. Yep, trend line. You know what, Adam. And so that's what I'm looking for at the power to heart rate metric. And so I put that little note to myself, MS story. So again, last slide. If you have any questions, type those in. This is just a funny little personal anecdote. If anybody on here knows Matt Spack, a friend of mine, known him for quite some time now. I was out on a ride with him, and it was a couple hours. We rode around Big Chute, up to Big Chute and back, something like that. And Matt has a lot of energy. I was training full time at the time, so I would always take me a long time to warm up. And long story short, where I kind of let him set the pace of the ride. And he doesn't have a power meter at this point, and he might have had a heart rate monitor on. He probably wasn't watching it, but I was just keeping an eye on my power, and he was kind of pushing. He's like, we were doing like riding beside each other, 200, 215, 220 watts for the first hour and a half, 2 hours, something like that. And I was pretty comfortable. I knew it was a little bit firm, but I was like, just going to let him set the pace. And then about 2 hours in, he starts slowing down. And he's basically half wheeling me for the first 2 hours. And then I just held him at that. I just kept the power the same. So 200, 215, 220 in that range. And I just held him at that. And I knew he was half wheeling a little bit. I knew he was dying, knew what was going on. And he turns, he's like, hey man, like the pace really picked up. Like you're really picking up the pace. What's going on? And I just kind of turned to him. I'm like, no man, you just slowed down. I'm doing the same power that you were doing, at the start of the ride. And, light bulbs just went on for him. And I think he bought a power meter the next day. So that's my, a great just personal anecdote of training with power, and of a real world example of your heart rate might be the same, you might even feel good, but if your power's declining, there's something going on there, and it's a great piece of information to know, especially when you do start training. And if anybody knows Matt, you can give him a hard time, tell him I told that story. But I think a few light bulbs did go off for him, and just got him thinking a little bit more about power and how we can use it as a tool. It doesn't need to even dictate our training, but just to we can look back at a ride and take a look and see, did we accomplish our goals? Every training ride, in my opinion, you should have goals for that training ride. A workout prescription that a coach gives you, or you buy off of a training plan, that's your goal for the ride. And these tools, these metrics, give you the tools to evaluate those workouts and make sure that what you wanted to do got done, and you're doing what the training plan says to do, you're doing what your coach wants you to do. But these are the tools, these are the little indicator lights that you can look at on these platforms. And even if you can't see these because you don't pay for Training Peaks, Golden Cheetah is free. It's desktop software. You can see all these metrics plus some. So you don't have to pay to see this stuff. Trust me on that. If there's a will, there's a way. You might have to drag and drop files, but you can see these metrics. So that's it for me. I'm gonna slowly tune off. I don't see any new questions coming in. Update on the next few webinars. Next week is going to be the strength webinar, which lots of people asked me for. I'm probably gonna, ruffle some feathers, as I indicated on one post. But that will be next week. Strength as a cyclist, and as in my opinion of strength, and how to use strength as a cyclist. And then the following week is going to be nutrition. So I don't have the dates in front of me. That'll probably be the 10th and the 17th, 18th. So it'll be nutrition. Again, nutrition as a cyclist and as an athlete. And we'll go into a few things there. Endurance athletes, cyclocross athletes. Again, my opinion, what I've seen, what I've learned over the years. And then we'll get into something else for the last week in January. So I do have one last question. For steady rides, do you set your computer average power set for a longer period, i.e. 30 minutes? So Hinkle's asking, do you use a longer average power for, if I'm understanding this correctly, for 30 minutes? So yes, I would. So if I'm doing a steady ride, if I understand your question correctly, Hinkle, sorry, my brain might be starting to shut down on me. I'll do a warm-up, and then let's say I want to average 150 watts for the 2 hours. I'll start a new lap, and I'll look at that average until I want to cool down for 5 or 10 minutes at the end of the ride. So that's the way I use a Garmin or a Wahoo, is I use the lap average feature. And I'll usually use a 3 or 5 second rolling average to see it. But yes, I'll use I want to see the average power for the main set of an endurance ride or steady state ride. Gyms are closed Wednesday. Any gym substitute? I'll do my best to. Short answer, yes. I think you can do strength without a gym. I think there's a lot you can do without it, and I'll do my best to include some of those in the strength webinar next Monday. Is just at home solutions. You can do a fair amount of work. Even if you can get outside as well for some jumps and throws, and we'll get into some of that stuff. But yes, we'll get into that. Again, strength as a cyclist, and strength as a cyclist doesn't mean you need to be in the gym 3 days a week with a squat rack. And maybe that's just a bit of a teaser for you. So at this time of year, in my opinion, I don't know if there's anything you need in a gym to do what you need to do as a cyclist. Again, please send any angry feedback or criticism on that statement to me. But that's what we'll get into. And the next one will be nutrition. And I'll do my best to, simplify that as much as possible, how I look at nutrition and nutrition as a cyclist. So, without further ado, I will cut myself off. Thank you all for joining tonight. It was a great turnout, better than November. So hopefully keep going with that. Please share. Please let your riding buddies know, friends, family, that I'm doing these. I'm not looking for any compensation. I like sharing what I know. And if I can get people pointed in the right direction and give everybody a few nuggets here and there, then that's all I'm looking for. So again, Happy New Year, everyone. I hope everyone and everyone's family and friends are healthy, and look forward to seeing you all on the road, trails, and cross courses in 2022. So good night, everyone. Good night, everyone.